The theater hummed with that particular kind of nervous electricity that only live television could produce. The low murmur of thousands of voices, the rustle of jackets and programs, the faint squeak of shoes against the polished floor. Bright stage lights swept slowly across the audience, illuminating faces filled with anticipation, doubt, and hunger for something unforgettable. Backstage, a Filipino man stood alone in the shadows, hands clasped tightly in front of him, feeling the steady thud of his heartbeat echo in his ears. He closed his eyes for a moment and breathed in, imagining the sound of waves back home, imagining his mother's voice telling him to sing from the heart, not the throat. Next up, a voice called out. He opened his eyes. This was it. As he walked onto the stage, the sheer size of the auditorium hit him like a physical force. The ceiling seemed impossibly high, the lights impossibly bright. The judge's desk gleamed at the center, Howie Mandel leaning forward with playful curiosity, Heidi Klum smiling politely, Sofia Vergara already grinning as if she expected something fun. And Simon Cowell sat there, arms folded, expression unreadable, the same look that had ended 1,000 dreams and launched 1,000 others. The contestant swallowed hard but kept walking, his steps measured, his posture respectful, almost humble. The applause that greeted him was warm but cautious. He nodded to the audience, then to the judges, his smile shy but sincere. The microphone felt cool in his hand. For a brief second, the silence stretched, thick and heavy. "What's your name?" Simon asked, his voice flat, professional. "My name is Daniel," the man replied, his accent soft, unmistakably Filipino. "And where are you from, Daniel?" "I'm from Cebu, Philippines," he said, his voice steady now, grounded by the truth of it. Simon raised an eyebrow. "And what brings you all the way here?" Daniel paused, choosing his words carefully. "I grew up singing," he said. "In my house, in the streets, at family gatherings. Music was everything. Elvis was my father's favorite. He played his records every Sunday morning." A faint smile tugged at Sophia's lips. Simon tilted his head slightly. "So what will you be doing for us today?" Daniel inhaled, feeling the moment narrow to a single point. "I'll be singing an Elvis Presley song." There it was. A ripple of reaction moved through the audience, some laughter, some murmurs, a few skeptical groans. Someone near the front shook their head as if to say, "Not another one." Even Simon leaned back in his chair, lips pressed together, the corners of his mouth hinting at doubt. He had heard this before, countless times. Elvis impersonators with jumpsuits and wigs, with exaggerated accents and hollow bravado. Most of them faded within seconds. "All right," Simon said finally. "Whenever you're ready." The band prepared. A soft instrumental intro filled the air, familiar yet restrained. Daniel closed his eyes again, not for show, but to steady himself. He thought of his father's old radio, the crackle of vinyl, the way Elvis's voice had once filled their tiny living room. Then he opened his mouth. The first note stopped the room cold. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. But it was unmistakable. That deep, smooth timbre, warm, resonant, wrapped in effortless control, flowed from him as if it had always lived there. The phrasing was perfect, the timing instinctive. He didn't push the sound, he let it roll, easy and confident, like it had nowhere else to go. A collective intake of breath swept through the audience. Simon's head snapped up. The second line came, and with it the subtle vibrato, the slight southern drawl, the gentle curl at the end of the phrase that made Elvis Elvis. It wasn't parody. It wasn't mimicry. It was something far more unsettling, and far more thrilling. It felt authentic, as if the song itself had chosen this voice. Heidi's eyes widened. Howie's mouth fell open. Sophia leaned toward the desk, whispering, "Oh my God," under her breath. Daniel stood still, not trying to sell the performance with big gestures or theatrics. He didn't need to. His presence was quiet, grounded, respectful, like someone borrowing a sacred robe and refusing to wrinkle it. The lights softened around him, casting a golden glow that seemed to belong to another era. By the chorus, the audience had forgotten to be skeptical. Heads nodded. Hands rose instinctively, some people clapping softly in time, others pressing palms to their chests. A woman in the second row wiped tears from her eyes without quite understanding why. Simon leaned forward slowly, elbows on the desk, eyes locked on the stage. His expression had changed, not joy yet, not even excitement, but disbelief. The kind that makes you question your own ears. He had built a career on knowing voices, on identifying the line between good and extraordinary. And this was crossing it. Daniel hit a lower note, rich and full, then eased into the next phrase with that unmistakable Elvis swagger, felt more than seen. It was in the sound, the rhythm, the confidence that didn't demand attention but commanded it anyway. The band followed him now, not leading, letting his voice set the pace. The room felt suspended, as if time itself had slowed. Phones that had been raised to record froze midair as people realized no video could quite capture this feeling. This wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't novelty. It was presence. When Daniel reached the final line, he opened his eyes. For the first time, he looked directly at the judges, then out into the sea of faces beyond the lights. He held the last note just long enough to let it bloom, then gently released it into silence. For half a second, no one moved. Then the theater exploded. Applause crashed like thunder. People leapt to their feet, cheering, shouting, whistling. The sound rolled forward, wave after wave, swallowing the stage. Daniel stood there, stunned, his chest rising and falling fast now, eyes wide, trying to process what he was hearing. Simon stood up. Not slowly. Not reluctantly. He stood immediately, clapping hard, shaking his head as if the laws of reality had just been bent in front of him. And in that moment, before a single word was spoken, everyone knew, this audition was no longer just another performance. Something rare had just happened. The roar of the audience didn't fade quickly, it swelled, fed on itself, bouncing off the walls and ceiling until it felt almost physical, like a force pressing against Daniel's chest. He stood frozen for a heartbeat, hands still loosely gripping the microphone, eyes darting from one judge to the next as if he were afraid this might all vanish if he moved too quickly. The lights above him seemed brighter now, warmer, and for the first time since stepping on stage, he felt the full weight of what had just happened. Simon was still standing. That alone sent another wave of cheers through the crowd. Daniel noticed it, and his breath caught. He had watched this man on television for years, watched him stay seated when others rose, watched him dismantle performances with a few calm, devastating words. Seeing Simon Cowell on his feet felt unreal, like watching a statue come to life. The applause finally began to settle, though the energy in the room remained charged, restless, hungry. Simon lifted a hand, signaling for quiet. It took a moment, but gradually the noise softened to a murmur. Daniel bowed his head slightly, instinctively, his cheeks flushed. His hands trembled now that the song was over, the adrenaline rushing out of him all at once. He forced himself to look up. "I don't even know where to begin," Simon said, his voice carrying easily through the theater. He paused, clearly choosing his words with care, which only heightened the tension. "I've sat here for a very long time. I've heard thousands, literally thousands, of people sing Elvis Presley." A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the crowd. "And most of the time," Simon continued, "it's an impression. Sometimes it's entertaining. Sometimes it's embarrassing." He tilted his head, eyes still fixed on Daniel. "What you just did, that was something else entirely." Daniel swallowed. His grip on the microphone tightened. "It wasn't karaoke," Simon said. "It wasn't a costume. It wasn't a trick. It felt natural, effortless. And that is incredibly rare." Howie slammed his palm on the desk, grinning. "I need to jump in here," he said, leaning forward. "Because my brain is still trying to catch up with what my ears just heard. You didn't just sound like Elvis, you sounded like the idea of Elvis that lives in people's memories." The audience erupted again, cheers cutting through the air. Daniel laughed softly in disbelief, shaking his head as if to say, "This can't be about me." Sophia pressed a hand to her chest. "I got chills," she said, her accent thick with emotion. "Real chills. You know how many people come on this stage wanting to be famous. You came here wanting to honor something, and that is why it worked." Heidi nodded enthusiastically. "There was so much respect in your performance," she added. "You weren't trying to steal his legacy. You were carrying it." Daniel felt his eyes burn. He blinked rapidly, trying to stay composed. "Thank you," he managed, his voice cracking just slightly. Simon leaned forward again, resting his forearms on the desk. "Daniel, I want to ask you something," he said. "If Elvis were sitting here tonight, what do you think he would say?" The question hung in the air. Daniel took a breath, steadying himself. "I think," he said slowly, "he would say, 'Sing it your way, son.'" Feel it. Simon smiled. Not a smirk. A real smile. That, he said quietly, is exactly what you did. The audience surged to its feet once more, applause thunderous, sustained. Daniel's heart felt like it might burst. Somewhere in the crowd, he imagined his father watching, smiling that same quiet smile he used to wear on Sunday mornings. Then Simon straightened in his chair. "All right," he said, glancing down the judge's table. "Let's do this." Howie didn't hesitate. "That's a yes from me." "Yes," Sophia exclaimed, slamming the button in front of her. Heidi leaned forward and pressed hers. "Absolutely yes." 3 lights glowed. 3 yeses. Daniel's knees went weak. He turned toward Simon, the last vote looming larger than the others combined. The room held its breath. Simon looked at him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch just enough to make everyone squirm. Then he stood again. "Daniel," he said, his voice firm but warm, "this is a very easy yes." The 4th light flashed. Daniel's hands flew to his mouth as the reality crashed down on him. The crowd screamed. Confetti cannons exploded overhead, raining gold and white across the stage. He dropped to one knee, overwhelmed, laughter and tears spilling out at the same time. As he stood, brushing confetti from his shoulders, Simon raised his voice over the chaos. "But I'm not finished," he said. The crowd quieted just enough to listen. "People spend their entire lives trying to find something that makes them stand out," Simon continued. "You walked in here with humility, with history, with heart, and you reminded us why certain voices never die. Remember this moment, because it's only the beginning." Daniel nodded, unable to speak, his chest heaving. He looked out into the audience one last time, soaking it in. The faces, the lights, the sound. For a fleeting second, it felt like time had folded in on itself, like the past and present had met right there on that stage. As he walked off, the applause followed him all the way into the wings, echoing long after he disappeared from view. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel knew his life had just split cleanly into 2 parts. Before he opened his mouth, and after the world heard Elvis through him.